Welcome to Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones.
Hello and welcome to Advocating for Dads with experienced family law attorney Jana K. Jones. Jana has been providing father-focused legal services since 2009 and is passionate about fair custody arrangements in North Carolina. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Custody Battles, What Every Dad Should Know. So great to see you again.
Hey, Kevin, it's great to see you as well.
So let's start here. What are some common misconceptions that people have regarding fathers' rights when it comes to custody battles?
I think the biggest thing is that while we call it father's rights, they're just parental rights. They're no different than mother's rights. You have a constitutionally protected right as a parent, not as a mom or a dad. And so those rights are equal. And we talk about father's rights because a lot of times there are a lot of assumptions about those being less than those of mom, but the reality is they're the same rights that mom has.
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that a lot of people think, and maybe even, different generations might even feel that way even more, that it's like, oh, well, the mom's going to get all the custody and everything. Like, that's just how it works.
Exactly.
That's not the case.
Not at all. No. In the state of North Carolina, everything is about the best interest of the child, not about going with traditional gender roles.
Right.
So if dad is going to be a better primary custodian than mom, then the court has no problem giving the dad primary physical custody of the child.
What steps should fathers take to prepare for what they might know to be a contentious custody dispute that's upcoming?
So I would say communication is really, really important. Let's say something happens with the child at school, or maybe the child gets hurt. Communicating that to mom is going to be really important, because what you don't want it to look like is that, well, because I have it under control, there's nothing to really worry about. I don't need to communicate that to the other side. Well, you do. I think a lot of times the reasons why women can tend to fare a little bit better overall is because we are detail oriented and we are master communicators, right? And so
wait a minute.
If something happens with the child, we are more likely to over communicate what happened than under communicate, right? And obviously these are stereotypes, but
Sure.
That is really helpful when it comes to a court determining what is in the child's best interest when they're looking for a custody schedule, because the parent who is able to communicate with the other side effectively is usually the one that the court tends to believe is going to put the child's best interest first. And then that's going to make that custody arrangement a little bit more likely to go that parent's way. So communication, transparency is going to be really important. Additionally, documentation. So when you are having a hearing, your testimony is your best evidence, but you do want exhibits that can back up what you're saying. So if, you reach out to mom, for instance, and you want to get the child for the weekend or a wedding out of town or whatever the case may be, and you don't communicate that in writing, you just say that you asked for that time and mom said no, that's not going to be as strong as if you sent a text message or an email saying, hey, I'd like to get the child on this date, and there's either no response from mom or there's a denial from mom, right? You've got your evidence to back that up. Mm-hmm. So having documentation is going to be really important as well.
You said before, like kind of almost like oversharing is what we need to do in that scenario, because I have a 4-year-old and he gets hurt all the time. He's just falling all over the place. I don't tell my wife every time he gets hurt. But in a situation where you're having a custody dispute or there's joint custody, maybe share those things when you normally wouldn't if you were still married.
Exactly. Because let's say that your son, fell down or something like that, and it ended up being a bruise the next day.
Right.
And that next day, child is with mom, and mom's like, where's this bruise coming from? What's going on? Mm-hmm. Well, had you communicated that, he stumbled or he fell or something like that at the park, then that bruise is not going to seem like some big red flag. But if there's been absolutely no communication about this fall and there's a bruise, and then we're kind of dismissive, he just fell, it was no big deal, that can become a big problem down the road.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. What are some of the common mistakes that fathers make during custody battles that might even jeopardize their chances of co-parenting?
I think it really goes back to what we just talked about. Open communication and transparency, being straightforward about things that are going on, and really over communicating, over sharing as to what's happening with the child. It's going to be really important. I think a lot of times it seems to be this way. I won't say it's always this way, but when dads get in new relationships, they tend to keep that a little close to the vest for various reasons. And it's understandable depending on how mom may react to it.
Sure.
But it's never helpful for the child to be the one to let mom know that dad's in a new relationship, or, that the child has met this new partner. You want to try to be proactive with that and go ahead and let mom know, hey, I'm in a new relationship. I want to introduce our child to this person. This is what I'm thinking about doing. You're not necessarily asking for permission, but you do need to communicate that new information to the other parent. I see my dads tend to try to keep that close to the vest, and that is not a helpful strategy.
We discussed that a little bit in the last episode too. Are there other things you find that men are more likely to keep close to the vest, where you were like, you should be communicating this to your ex?
No, that's usually the biggest
That's
one
the
that
big
I
one.
see that causes the most strife between co-parents.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. We talked a little bit about documentation before, texting and emailing rather than just talking in person or even on the phone. Is there other documentation that can be really important in cases like these?
Well, you want to make sure that you have access to school and medical records as a parent. So if something is going on with the child in one of those departments, that you are knowledgeable about that. And what you don't want to say is, I didn't know because mom didn't tell me. You are just as capable of reading those medical records or asking to be on, the MyChart or whatever provider app you've got, so that you can find out about what's going on, as well as school records. So you know how the child is doing in school, or what their attendance record is, things of that nature. You do not want to depend on mom to give you that information. You want to go out and have access to that information yourself.
So be more proactive. Don't
Yeah.
just count on somebody else to give you the information.
Exactly.
Why is that something that you feel is so important?
Well, because it goes back to that best interest argument that the court is going to be considering when they're determining a custody schedule, right? So if one of the parents is proactive, is communicating with the teachers, knows what's going on with the pediatrician, et cetera, and the other parent is depending on the parent to tell them what's going on, then that's not going to come off so great, right? Because this is your child too. You're entitled to the information. You can get your name added same way that mom or, dad could, whomever it is in that scenario. So you want to make sure that you are taking all the steps you can as a parent to be as informed as possible about what's going on with your child.
You mentioned earlier that women just tend to be more detail oriented, and you called it a stereotype, but it's one based and rooted in fact. I can attest to that for sure. Is it something that, like, do you have to coach dads a lot, like kind of on saying like, hey, you need to be more proactive with this or that? Do you find that's something that's very common?
Yeah, it's relatively common. I find that most of my dads, once I tell them why this stuff is important, kind of understand it and can internalize it and then move forward with that new information. I just think it's something that a lot of my dads just hadn't thought about until they get into this scenario where they're fighting over custody.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't, you got so many other things going on in your mind when it comes to a divorce. That one just didn't kind of pop up. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. And if that's how the parents are traditionally handled things, right? If mom has been the one that traditionally took care of doctor's appointments, school stuff,
That's true.
and dad was depending on mom to give him that information, that's fine in a marriage dynamic or a co-parenting or a relationship, I should say, dynamic. But once you're in a co-parenting situation, you've got to get that information for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm thinking about all the stuff that I really don't know what my wife does. So yeah, that would be a whole nother ball of wax that you have to try to figure out there. What specific questions do you feel fathers should ask their attorneys during consultations about these matters?
I think it's going to always be important to ask the attorney that you are consultant with what their experience is, not only just as an attorney, but just what they have seen and what is likely to happen based on the facts and circumstances in their case, so that you can be realistic about expectations. And I think it's important, even before you start asking the attorney questions, that you actually know what you want. Obviously, I can advocate for anything that my client is telling me that they want me to advocate for, but I can't tell you what you actually want. I can't tell you if you want joint custody or you want every other weekend or you want primary. Only you know that. And so working through that and figuring that out on your own before you come to an attorney is going to be extremely important.
And do you feel like when dads come to see you, are they a little bit discombobulated, do they have their ducks in a row, or is there anything that they should try to pull together before they come and see you?
No, not necessarily. There'll be an opportunity once you become my client to get me evidence and information that I need to draft pleadings, to work on settlement, and to prepare for hearings. So that's not so important. I think the most important thing that a dad can know coming into a consultation with me is what he actually wants, because that can change. I've had clients where they wanted one thing when they came to me. We got the case finished, and then a year later, they wanted something different. It's not as easy to change an order as it is to get an original order. There's an additional step when you're modifying a custody order as opposed to getting your original custody order. So with an original custody order, it's all about best interest of the child. That's all the court is tasked with determining. And then they make a schedule based on that. When you are doing a modification of a current custody order, the court has to first find a substantial change in circumstances since the entry of the first order. If you get over that hurdle, then the court can consider best interest and perhaps changing the schedule. So if nothing major has changed except you've changed your mind, that's not going to be sufficient for the court to change the custody order. So it's going to be extremely important to know what you actually want before you start asking me to advocate for it.
That's a really, really good point. I'm glad we touched on that for sure. What is the importance of having an attorney such as yourself who is well-versed in custody dispute matters specifically?
So I think, again, having that wealth of knowledge and information and experience is going to be important to understand likelihoods and outcomes and how to best prepare yourself and present yourself based on what it is that you're asking for. So you want to ask questions of the attorney that you're talking to see what their experience level is. And you also want to talk to them about your specific circumstances and what is a realistic outcome based on those facts and circumstances.
Can you talk about child custody evaluators, kind of what their role is, what and how their assessments might influence custody decisions?
Yeah, so we have the Council for Children's Rights here in Mecklenburg County, and if they are appointed to a case, it is their job to determine kind of a best interest determination before the judge does. So they're going to interview the parents, interview the child. They will talk to collaterals. They will look at school records. They will go to the homes of the parties, and then they will create a report and tell the court what they believe is the best schedule for the child based on their investigation. So it's going to be important to communicate with these folks. It's going to be important to be straightforward and transparent with them and to work with them, because anyone who seems to be thwarting that is already kind of in a sticky place with the judge, because their job, the Council for Children's Rights, is just to figure out what's best for the child, to advocate for the child. They're not on, mom's side, dad's side. They are simply there for the child. And so the court heavily leans on their assessments and determinations when the court is making an ultimate decision about best interest of child. So if you are standing in the way of that, that will not bode well for you in front of the judge.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The judge has no interest in taking sides between mom and dad or the two partners. They have no desire to get involved in that. They're just thinking about the child. So you got to be honest and transparent with everybody to make sure that you're in a good light in that respect, right?
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. When it comes to the emotional toll of a custody battle, obviously the emotions run high in these sorts of things. How can fathers manage that, both for themselves and for their kids?
Yeah, so going back to an earlier point, therapy is really important, right? Whenever a relationship is ending, whether it's a divorce or just parents who have been together and are no longer in a relationship, it's kind of like a death. And so you need to talk to someone who can help you work through those emotions and kind of try to get to the other side of them. And the court system is not the place for that. And your attorney is not the person for that. So I think therapy is extremely important. Find yourself a good counselor, somebody that you can talk to, someone you can trust to work through the myriad of emotions that you're going to be going through.
What do you feel is the best way to handle? I know you're not a therapist, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but when it comes to keeping the child's or children's emotions even keel, have you seen that play out in a positive way?
So I think when parents put the child or children first, that usually is what it's going to be, what bodes best for the child.
Okay. So it just naturally kind of goes that direction when you do that?
Exactly. If they are your polar star, if they are your number one priority, if you can check your ego at the door, then I think you're usually going to get to the right place.
Once custody is determined, what steps can fathers take to foster a positive co-parenting relationship?
So I think really it's just communication and transparency. We've talked about this in a previous podcast.
We do, yeah. That should be the title.
Exactly. But it's so important. You've got to communicate and you've got to be honest with one another on where the child is at, things that are going on in your life that may affect the child, things of that nature. You just want to be as proactive with these things as possible.
If for any dads that are listening now to this and about to go through custody battle or just determining co-parenting, what are the most important things for them to consider right out of the gate?
What schedule you actually are looking for. So if you are looking for a joint custody arrangement, then work towards doing that even before you get attorneys in the court system involved. If you are looking to have primary custody of your child, do your best to implement that scenario and situation prior to getting courts and the attorneys involved. Whatever it is that you are looking for as it relates to a schedule, do your best to go ahead and get that implemented. Do your best to not be bullied into a schedule that you do not want.
How important is it to get representation, to call your office early?
It's really important. I think it's important even if you're in a good co-parenting relationship. You want to know your rights and responsibilities as a parent in general, and you want to know what your avenues are if things do go south, right? Obviously we're not talking about premarital agreements, but
Right.
This is kind of a good point to make, or a good parallel to make. You don't get into a prenup because you're expecting or hoping to divorce. You're doing that kind of like as an insurance policy if things go south. Same thing with getting advice about what could happen if the co-parenting relationship breaks down. It's always going to be important to get information. Knowledge is power. So just because you get the information doesn't mean you got to file a custody action, doesn't mean that the co-parenting relationship has to break down, but you should know what your rights and responsibilities are. So always get that consultation.
It's great advice as always. Well, thank you for joining us on Advocating for Dads with experienced family law attorney Jana K. Jones. To connect with Jana, head to lawofficeofjkj.com, and please like and subscribe and give us a review in the comments below. Jana, always great to talk to you. Thanks for all the tips.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos like this one.